Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by deadair Dennis Maller. He is a Boston-based comedian, actor, writer, and podcaster. He's been heard all over the country. So we're going to get him to tell his story and talk about his career. See why they call him Deadair Dennis. Hopefully there's no dead air doing this podcast, but thank you so much for joining me, Dennis.
Oh, my pleasure. No, the nickname is an ironic nickname. Dead air, for those who are not in the industry, dead air just means silence. And I never stop talking, so it's like calling a fat guy tiny. That's basically.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yes, well, I think you did a good enough job of reading the words that I would have said, saying the words that I would have said about myself as a comedian, an actor, and a podcaster living in Boston. And I want to point out, I live in Boston, or more like I suffer in Boston. I am not from Boston. I'm originally from Baltimore, and I moved here just about 10 years ago to continue my radio career because I left Baltimore because I ran out of bridges to burn.
Gotcha. Well, tell everybody kind of how you got your start and kind of actually what you do.
Yeah, the way I got my start. Let's talk about radio. Why not? Let's start because that's the thing that actually brings me money, or at least it used to bring me money. The start in radio. It's a funny one because I was in high school, as they do, they make you try to figure out whatever your career opportunities are going to be, and they make you look up jobs and colleges and all that stuff. And as a high school kid, I enjoyed building things or working on things and stuff. In fact, I put in my bio that my journey in radio started when I fixed my dad's hi-fi combo 8-track and record player so I could play my Chipmunks Rocking Across the USA record. And so I wanted to make things. So I thought I was going to be a civil engineer. That's what I looked up throughout high school, was how to be a civil engineer, what a civil engineer is, what an architect is, all that stuff. And the way I understood it is an architect designs a building. The civil engineer makes it happen. I was like, oh, I'm good at math. I'm good at science. I like building things. Yeah, civil engineering sounds like perfect to me. Specifically picked colleges to apply to that were good engineering schools, and got turned down by almost all of them until I came to a community college in the D.C. area, in Montgomery County, just outside of D.C., which is like a 45-minute drive from where I grew up in Baltimore, which is, by the way, the bad part of Baltimore, known as Baltimore. And so the day I drove down to college to register, this community college, as I'm standing in line to register for my engineering classes, for first year engineering classes and all the stuff that they recommend you take, or require you to take rather, I'm flipping through the little booklet of other things, and I see television production and radio production classes. And as I got to the counter, I changed my entire major, switched to that. And then 6 years later, I'm not going to say graduated because I went to 6 years of community college and technically didn't graduate, but stopped doing college with the equivalent of 3 degrees, one in audio production, one in television production, and one in broadcast journalism. And while still in college, I got a job working with iHeartRadio, and I spent 20 years off and on different radio programs, different companies, doing podcasting and stuff like that. And then as I was working in radio, I was feeling creatively unfulfilled. I had worked in DC primarily most of my career, and then an alternative rock station. They flipped one of the jazz station to an alternative rock station, which is like, hey, you want to piss off all your listeners? That's the best way to do it. The only bigger jump for listenership is flipping a country station to a hip hop station. And so the state, I knew the guy who was in charge of the station interimly until they hired people. And I just kept bugging him every day. I was like, hey, I live 10 minutes away from that station in Baltimore. Alternative rock is my medium. It's the music I know the most about. Please let me go help. Let me go help. Let me go help. Let me go help. Please, please let me go help. Let me go help. And so he just went, fine, leave me alone and I'll find something for you to do. And I practically ran the station. Me and another guy practically ran the station for a couple months until they started bringing in people. And I was on air personality, fill in here and there, help running all the recorded automated hours, and working under some very inspiring music director and program directors and whatnot. And then until 18 months later, they flipped it again to top 40. And I stuck around. I was one of the only people they didn't fire because they needed somebody to run the place again, to continue running the place as it was automated until they hired staff, and then was there for a little while and end up moving to Boston. But while I was there doing the alternative rock station, I really wasn't being challenged. I wasn't really being creatively fulfilled because I had very little to do with the station, even though I was kind of running everything behind the scenes and keeping it on the air and doing all the radio grunt work, to say in finger quotes. I didn't feel like I was really part of the station. So I decided to finally do what I've been wanting to do and should have done long ago. And that was take my career into my own hands and start doing stand-up comedy. Because when you do comedy, you don't have to check in with anybody. You don't have to answer to anybody. You just go do it for the most part. So I did. I just went and started doing it again. I did it off and on for a number of years, and I have a lot of friends who were comedians that I helped and workshopped and wrote jokes with, but never really performed. And I finally decided, I'm going to say 13 years ago. I don't know how long ago it really was. I think it was a Columbus Day. All I remember is it was Columbus Day when I made the decision. I think that very weekend or a couple weekends after, I finally got back on stage and started doing it, and consistently since. So let's say 13 years. Let's just every so often I just up the amount of years. I don't know how long I've been doing it. I don't keep track of things like that. I don't keep track of anniversaries. If I remember a date, it's usually by coincidence. But so yeah, I've been doing it since then, and off and on radio and podcasting and working for myself as a freelance engineer and producer and recordist and editor for some of the biggest companies in the country, like Gimlet and Earwolf and NPR and the BBC and all them. Just helping. I make it sound altruistic. No, more like just working for them, getting paid to do what they need me to do.
Well, what I was gonna say is, I know you've been heard all across the country, not just Boston on SiriusXM. I'm in radio as well. I graduated from the Academy of Radio and TV Broadcasting in Huntington Beach, California.
Oh, word.
So tell us how you got to be heard all across the country.
Well, the reason I do is because I've done stuff on SiriusXM. So that's an international, or I guess that's nationwide or whatever it is. But also, I've done bits for different syndicated radio stations or syndicated radio shows. Yeah, that's how. Just basically, predominantly one of the main ones that I worked with was this guy Jackson Blue, who was the morning show at the top 40 station, the jazz station turned alternative rock turned top 40 station. He was our morning show. He came in and we worked together, and he also had a syndicated show, weekly syndicated show across the country. So some of the bits that we would do on his morning show, he would also put on that show. We would write bits together of just doing character stuff, or I chime in as like second chair for a bit, this or that. So there's that. And then I have a lot of friends that work at SiriusXM that would call me up like, hey, I need somebody to pretend to be this kind of expert for a gag, or I need somebody to pretend to call in and pretend to be this kind of caller for this gag, or, hey, that's a really funny idea. Why don't you call me this week and we'll put it on the air. I was also the producer that launched the Blue Collar Comedy channel on SiriusXM. I was the live remote producer and engineer. we launched the Blue Collar Comedy Channel from backstage of the Warner Theater while they were filming the Blue Collar Comedy Rides Again show or movie. So the Blue Collar guys, Jeff Foxworthy and Ron White and Larry the Cable Guy and Bill Engvall, they've made their little comedy movies. I say they made their little comedy movies very insultingly for guys that have millions of dollars, and I don't have millions of pennies. So I shouldn't sound as insulting to them as I just did. But so they filmed a couple comedy movies. You know, it's just stand up that they release in movie theaters. That's really what it is. And I worked backstage in the green room with them to launch the Blue Collar Comedy Channel for SiriusXM.
Get her done.
Yeah. I spent the entire night with Larry the Cable Guy. It was the first time he was headlining their show. So he was with us as the rest of the guys were on stage. And people can insult and say everything bad they want about Larry the Cable Guy, or Dan as his real name is. But he has amazing comedic timing. He's very smart, funny, generous, nice, super nice guy. But when we took a picture together and he went, "Get her done," I literally almost throat punched him. So.
Wow. So you also say that you're allergy free since 1981. To tell us what that means.
Oh, that just means I'm not allergic to anything, and it's just a funny way of saying it. I used to also do this bit early in my career about how I don't offer anything to the gene pool when it comes to women. Like, I'm short, I'm fat, I'm bald, and I have glasses. That's 4 strikes. That's 1 strike too many. And so, like, the only thing I offer to the gene pool is that your kid will not be born with hay fever because of me. That's it. I'm allergy free since 81 when I was born. I have not had any allergies. Although the truth to that is I'm starting to find out now through different doctor's appointments that I might actually be allergic to opioids. Yeah.
Also, the comedy editor for Big Boston. For those who don't know what Big Boston is, tell us about that.
Big Boston is a local alternative weekly newspaper here in the Boston area, and I write comedy interviews for them. That's how I get. That's usually how a lot of the bigger name guests on my podcast. So what do you really do? They came from that. They were coming to town, and they're like, "Hey, we need to get people to come to their show. Let's set him up with a local newspaper reporter," which is me. And so I would interview different comedians coming to town. And also, comedy editor is a very, very trumped up title. Let's not, calling me a writer is a very trumped up title. Here's what I do as a writer. I'm going to let you in on a secret. What I do is I record me interviewing other comedians. And then I have an AI transcribe the entire thing. And then I give that to my boss, the editor, who then spell checks it and then mails me a check. I am literally stealing from a nonprofit. It is. It really feels like that I'm getting away with something. But they like my interviews.
Speaking of interviews, you have a podcast. So tell us about the podcast and how you got that started.
I actually have not one, but 2 podcasts. The first one is called, that I just mentioned. It's called So What Do You Really Do? Where I interview artists and entertainers about their day jobs, talking about the things that we do during the day to support the things that we want to do at night. It came from a concept of when you work in radio for so long, creating a podcast just seems so easy. But I didn't just want to create a podcast. I didn't just want to be another comedian with a podcast. I wanted to have a good show about something. You know, I wanted to be able to have a thing, and it took me forever to figure it out. Like, I'm so sick of seeing just like, white guy podcasts where we're talking about the things that no one else is afraid to talk about. It was basically just 3 white comedian guys and their 1 black fan talking about why they should be allowed to say the N-word. That's really what most of those are, where it's like, oh, we're saying everything you're thinking. No, because what I'm thinking is, you suck. Anyway, so I wanted to have a good hook, a good reason to create interviews and create content. And it hit me one day. I was at a Christmas party here in Boston for one of the comedy clubs, has a legendarily really big comedy Christmas party. And I was just talking to another comedian who was a video game designer, and I was just asking him so many questions about video game design, and I realized that this is what the podcast should be about. This is what it is, talking about our interesting day jobs. I have an interesting day job working in radio. People constantly want to ask me questions about radio. They're fascinated about it. And then they get quickly, and then they always say one of two things afterwards. And one of them is always, oh, well, I don't listen to the radio anyway. So it's like, then why did you ask me so many questions about it? And the same question that they always ask is, why do you always play the same songs? And my reply to that is, because people keep requesting the same songs. That's why we keep playing them over and over. But yeah, at that Christmas party is the inspiration for the podcast. Called up a couple of comedians that I knew locally that had interesting, different day jobs that we could talk about. And one of the comedians I was talking about that night at the Christmas party, when I pitched him the idea, Don Zolo, came up with the name for the title. It was like, yeah, but the podcast sounds interesting, but you need an interesting name. Like, so what do you really do? And I'm like, that's it. That's perfect. Because like, oh, you're an actor. So what do you really do? Wait tables? Okay, cool. Like that was the idea behind the podcast. And then I had Don Zolo on the podcast talk about the job in real estate he does. And he completely forgot we had this conversation and that he was the he was the inspiration for the title. In fact, I think every couple of years I remind him of it anyway. But so yeah, that podcast is, I've had amazingly interesting people on it over the years. I've had some, I interviewed, one of my favorite interviews is I interviewed a band called the Dirty Dotties, who were comprised of different music teachers. Like one person was a music teacher. She taught at her house. One person taught at a music conservatory. Another person taught music in a public school. And then another musician just taught theory and stuff like that. And then one of the other members is a legit scientist, like white coat, flasks and Bunsen burners. And that's his day job. He goes and does science stuff. And then afterwards plays trumpet in a ska band. Like, that's crazy. And then it gets even crazier. One of the other musicians in the band, she just graduated from Berkeley with a degree in musical medicine. I don't remember the exact term. Basically, this is what she described it to me on, and it's a great episode. You should check it out everywhere podcasts are potted. So what do you really do? The episode with the Dirty Dotties. So she tells me about her job is basically things she got music therapy. That's what she does. And she would, like, if someone was having surgery, instead of giving them anesthesia, she would just go into the operating room with her guitar and start playing her guitar and control somebody's heart, the rhythm of their heart, the beat, the amount their heart beats, and control it with the beats per minute of her song. And I'm like, that's straight voodoo. That's what that is. That's not science. That's voodoo. That's witchcraft. And it's crazy, but it's cool. So I continue to keep doing the podcast. Some of my previous guests have included a very recent America's Got Talent contestant. I've also interviewed amazingly interesting people like Louis Black from The Daily Show, who was so kind and generous. And then also people like Jim Jeffries, who's a famous international comedian, and a ton of other amazingly interesting people that work really hard doing one thing just so they can go and do the thing that they're most passionate about. And that's really what the podcast is about, is learning who that person is through their passions and their necessities.
Absolutely. So tell us, what do you see the future of radio going? Because, it's changed since iHeartRadio purchased up a lot of stuff.
Oh, God. I don't know, because when I left iHeartRadio in 2018, podcasting was a dirty word to them. And then last year they started buying up tons of intellectual property podcasts and started creating a bunch of podcasts with celebrity hosts. And I don't think it's working out well for them. The future of radio, I don't know. Radio, I think, will always be there. I'm not going to be one of those doom and gloom people who's like, oh, radio will be obsolete in a couple of years. No, it's always going to be there. It's free. It's over the air. It's easily accessible. People will always be listening and watching it. My hopes is that it becomes local again. One of the big things that was happening in the industry when I was on my way out of it, and I guess I don't know if I'm ever actually out of it, but is that they were becoming homogenized and big corporations were taking control of everything and trying to create cookie cutter stations and make everything sound the same across the nation. And the one thing that radio has that nobody else has is their ability to be local. Right in your town, people who live in your town. Like, local news is still popular because people want to know what's going on locally. They want to be able to connect with their local people. And that's all radio has over top of everything else, is that they can broadcast to the people that are the ones listening to their station in their own town. And I think maybe that, like, if I don't know if deregulation will ever happen, which is not to get too deep into FCC law and territory. They basically took away the rule that states that a company can only own X amount of stations in a market, in a city, in a particular given area. Well, they didn't take it away. They just expanded it. So it's like you can own more. Before it used to be like you can only have like 2 stations in a given market. Now it's like you have like 20, whatever it is. I don't know if that'll ever happen, because the reason they changed that law is because people lobbied for it. They're not going to lobby against it. Nobody's going to spend their money for it. I think what's going to happen is the larger companies are going to sell off the stations. You're going to find people, and smaller companies and local companies are going to be more able to afford radio stations, and people are going to buy those up. Smaller companies are going to buy them up again, and you're going to have local jocks. You're going to have local talent again, talking to the local people, instead of one person doing a show for 25 different stations in 25 different cities and just speaking generically about what's going on. Maybe they'll do one local break that plays locally. But for the most part, it's not going to, I don't think you're going to have that nationwide syndicate. I use the word syndicated very loosely because it's not really syndication, but that nationwide cookie cutter where this station sounds exactly like the station from my hometown, and then I went to this city and it sounds exactly like this station from this other city. That's what I hope. It'll go back to being local. It'll go back to being the proving grounds for people who want to get into entertainment, because that's really, when you look back in the day, the people who were the innovators, the people who wanted to do things, the people who are just a little bit off center, all started in radio long time ago. And that was the attraction for people who could be creative and different and were going to be sensations. Like SCTV, Second City TV started as a radio show. The National Lampoon, the incredibly famous magazine, was also, before they started making movies, did radio shows. Like most of your favorite comedians, older comedians, all had started in radio or had a long-standing stint in radio. And I think we'll get back to that someday, because I think people are going to move away from social media, or the industry is going to continue to just hire innovators in social media, and bring them in their fold and allow them to have the resources to create, instead of just being homogenized and the samesies across. I think that's more a wish than really what will happen. What will probably happen is it's going to just stay as it is, and it's just going to continue to find ways to do what it does, but cheaper.
Do you have any current or upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about?
Well, I am working on currently my other podcast, which is a audio and video podcast called Word of the Day with Comedians. It is a short form educational podcast where a comedian and I get together, we pick a word, we make fun of that word, and then we come up with the funniest, most absurd sentence we can using that word in context. It is the funniest way to expand your vocabulary, and it can be found on iTunes, Spotify, and as an actual YouTube show, which is what all the real work is going into. And some people put their podcasts on YouTube, and it's just like the audio track with pictures. No, it's actual video, heads and faces moving. You could see us. It is a good fun time, albeit a lot of work, especially when I launched it last year. I launched it as a 5-episode-a-week podcast, video podcast and YouTube show, which was, I'm sure, is by the shocked look on your face right now, you understand that that was a ton of work and an incredibly insane thing to do. And the reason I did it is I wanted to see if I could. I wanted to see if I could keep up with that kind of workload and if I could build it to become something bigger and better than what it was. And don't worry, I failed miserably. It was we're still putting out episodes, not daily, just when I have free time. Every couple of weeks an episode will come out. So subscribing is very important because then you'll finally know about it when episodes come out. So subscribe to it on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube, and watch this hideous made-for-radio face talk to you.
Well, that just went into my next question I was going to ask you about, but you definitely knocked it out. Throw out your contact information so we can keep up with everything that you're up to.
Please do. Yes.
Yeah, give us your contact information.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was an off-air thing. Like, give me your yeah. No, yeah. If you want to find out about me, you can go. Everything that I do is at deadairdennis.com. deadairdennis.com. And of course, it's at deadairdennis on all the social medias because Synergy and nobody else wants this dumb name except a different radio guy in Kentucky who did who's famous for doing a fake bit about pretending he was fired from work just to drum up interest in what he was doing on the weekends.
Sweet. Well, close us out with some final thoughts that you have for the listeners. Maybe something that I forgot to touch on that you would like to talk about, or just anything finally you have for the listeners.
Yeah, no, I will take this platform to talk about something that's very near and dear to me, and that is mental illness. I am a huge proponent for No, that's not what I meant. I'm a huge proponent for mental health. Sorry. It would have been weird if I was just going to end this thing and my entire platform was like, everyone should have depression. That's not what I'm saying. I just want to take the stigma out of mental illness. I talk about my mental illness openly on stage in a lot of my comedy. I talk about it openly with other people, friends of mine who also suffer from it. In fact, I hate doing this because it now sounds like a pitch. Like I said, it sounds like an infomercial where I'm like, hey, buy my product. Oh, I do sell a coffee mug as part of my merch. It has, the podcast logo on it, and it has also written on it. It says, not until I've had my coffee, and coffee is scratched out and says antidepressants. And I is a mug that I sell because I want it. I think it's the best way to inform your coworkers that you live with a mental illness. I don't want people to feel uncomfortable talking about their mental illness, whether it's depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, or even if you have an eating disorder, it usually stems from other mental illnesses. That's a side effect of some of those other mental illnesses. Don't be ashamed about it. Get help. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing embarrassing about getting help, talking to a therapist, talking to a psychiatrist, talking to any professional. Especially if you're someone who might be at risk or danger. I mean, honestly, you can reach out to me, Dennis at deadairdennis.com, and you can talk about your mental illnesses and your health crises with me, and I'll be a listening board for you. I'll pretend that I'm not bored at all about it. I'll do a really good job about it. But I don't want people to feel uncomfortable talking about their health issues, especially when it comes to mental health. The numbers of suicide are staggering. I know. Hey, let's bring a comedian on. He starts talking about suicide. Great. This is hysterical. But no, it really is something that's near to me. I think we should, so many people who have suffered in silence with mental illness. And I don't want people to suffer in silence anymore. I want us all to live together openly about it and get help and not be afraid to ask for help when you need it or to recognize when you need help. And also, every dollar of the proceeds of those coffee mug sales, which you can buy at deadairdennis.com, every single dollar from every single sale of that coffee mug goes directly to the copay for my Zoloft. So it goes to a good cause.
Absolutely, ladies and gentlemen. So hit Dennis up if you need to. Check him out on deadairdennis.com so you can keep up with everything that he's up to. And if you enjoyed this episode or the show in general, please be sure to follow, rate, review, tell a friend. Once again, deadairdennis.com. Dennis, I appreciate you for joining me and gracing us with your presence and your expertise.
Oh, thank you for having me, dear DJ Curveball. This was a good time. I always enjoy talking about my favorite subject, which is me. So,
for more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.